province, while two Liberal MPs banned from the country have hit back at Beijing's demand that they repent their criticism of the country. Liberal Senator James Paterson is one of those politicians. He joins us from Melbourne this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Hamish.
The Chinese embassy has told you and your colleague Andrew Hasty that you won't be welcome in China until you repent your views. Do you plan to do that?
No, I'm not really the repenting type, Hamish. I'm agnostic, but even if I was, I wouldn't be following the commands of foreign powers to repent on my political views.
What's the impact of the Chinese state saying this stuff to you? I mean, are you likely to actually dig in harder in the commentary that you might provide relating to China's actions?
Well, even if I wanted to change my views and soften them, Hamish, I feel like it's impossible for me to do so now that I've been issued such a demand from the Chinese embassy. It's my job to speak up for Australia's national interest and our sovereignty and the values and concerns of the Australian people, not to speak up on behalf of any other government. And so I'm just going to continue to do that. And I know Andrew Hasty feels the same way.
The embassy says, and this is a quote, "China will never yield to colonisation of ideas and values." How do you interpret that?
Well, I don't know how to interpret that because it's certainly not what either I or Andrew have been doing. All we've been doing is giving voice to the genuine concerns we hold about issues like the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, as you've mentioned, like the case of the Australian writer who's detained there at the moment, Dr. Yang Hengjun, like China's activities in the South China Sea or their attempts at influencing our domestic politics.
You were supposed to take part in this study tour of China next month. What was the point of that? What were you hoping to learn, to understand, to get insight into?
Andrew and I were both invited by China Matters to visit China, and they did so knowing full well that we were critics of the Chinese Communist Party. But we accepted in good faith, hoping that we would have respectful dialogue with our counterparts. Although we've followed these issues closely, there's no substitute from going and visiting and hearing directly from the perspective of people on the other side and having the opportunity to air our concerns as well.
Do you think that Australian politicians need to be careful, though, about the language that they use? I mean, there's very clearly issues that need to be discussed and human rights questions that need to be raised. And I think the Andrew Hasty article that he wrote, the full article, was clearly very thoughtful, but there was this reference to Nazi Germany. Do you think that actually, if we're going to have these conversations, we need to do it in a very nuanced way that avoids anything that grabs the headlines, like comparing it to Nazi Germany?
I think we do also have to be measured and respectful, but we can't use that as an excuse not to be clear. And to be fair to Andrew, what he was talking about was the complacency of the Western powers in the 20th century in response to a rising power that wanted to change the existing global order. Well, that's exactly what we're dealing with now. That's not an attempt to equate China to Nazi Germany. It's just saying we have a rising power that doesn't accept the global order, that wants to change it, and the West has to know how to respond to that. And I don't think we can ignore the lessons of history just because some of those comparisons can be sensitive at times.
Do you have a view as to how the relationship with China can be managed when the economic side of it is so fundamental to our growth prospects, and the issues around strategic dominance in the region are so present, and the human rights questions appear only to be growing?
It has to be on the basis of respect. And what I mean by that is that China needs to understand that while we absolutely value our deep economic relationships and the other aspects of our relationship that are positive, like the cultural aspects of our relationship, that Australians are never going to sell out or be quiet about the values-based concerns that we have. We want to have a positive relationship, but we're not going to go along with and acquiesce when we hear about terrible revelations like we did in the New York Times yesterday.
But obviously, those sorts of issues have been present for a very long time, and Australia has, I think it's fair to say, had better relations with Beijing than what it does currently. Do you think we're doing something differently now that's souring the relationship, or do you think it's simply that China has become more sensitive to it?
Well, I think both parties always play a role in the quality of any relationship. But if we're doing anything at all in Australia that's different in recent years, I think it is that we're being more assertive about our own sovereignty. We banned political donations from foreign entities. We passed the Foreign Interference Transparency Scheme, which requires foreign actors to register and be transparent about their attempts to influence our domestic affairs. And I think there are some people in China who don't appreciate that.
You mentioned what the New York Times published over the weekend. It's an extraordinary cache of 400 documents which expose the complicity of the regime in Beijing in the internment and persecution of the Uyghurs and other minorities in Xinjiang. Maurice Payne has expressed Australia's strong concerns. Do you think we need to actually go a bit stronger on this?
Well, I think we've been very clear. Both Maurice Payne and the Shadow Foreign Minister Penny Wong have issued very clear statements about our concern, as have other world leaders. And what strikes me most about those documents is the dehumanising language that they use about Muslims in this case. They refer to them as a virus that needs to be cured and that no mercy should be exercised. That's deeply, deeply troubling.
How would you describe what is happening in China if all of this information is correct?
Well, all I could say, Hamish, is that at the best case scenario, if we take the Chinese Communist Party at their word, there are 1 million people of a minority faith who are forcibly detained in re-education camps. The worst case scenario doesn't even bear thinking about.
But I mean, what is that? What are they engaged in?
Well, a very disturbing crackdown on the individual liberties and religious freedoms of a minority faith. There were revelations in the Washington Post only a few weeks ago that used satellite images to demonstrate that mosques and cemeteries and other holy sites significant to Muslims in Western China appear to have been demolished and eradicated.
I think we can all hear what you're skirting around here. Is it an attempt at ethnic cleansing?
I don't know, Hamish. I fear that further revelations will disturb us even more, though.
Obviously, on top of all of this, it's been reported this morning, I think in The Australian, that another human rights program has been suspended. It's called the Human Rights Technical Cooperation Program. It's unclear at this stage, at least to my reading, which side paused the scheme, but it involved Australia and China and government funding. Do you know what happened?
No, I don't have any of the background on that, Hamish. And if those reports are right, I think it just re-emphasises the importance of other people like myself and Andrew Hastie speaking out publicly and being very clear about the concerns we have.
Do you think Australia needs to question the way in which it engages with China on these sorts of questions?
I think in recent years we've been managing it well. We've been more forthright about our concerns, we've been more assertive about our own interests, and we haven't allowed other countries, China included, to push us around on that.
Senator James Paterson, thank you very much.